So much of the political debate over the last 10 years has focused around immigration and borders. And I see so many people, libertarians, ANCAPs, who are complete defenders of freedom, complete defenders of liberty, have a very hard time with this topic. These are people who, like me, are completely ideologically opposed to everything the radical left has been doing to society for the last God knows how long. Everything these self-described liberals, these self-described progressives who are openly socialist and probably closet communists do is designed to increase the size, power, and authority of government. They want to give the government more authority to use its immoral monopoly of force to force people to do things that they don't want to do, whether that's pay taxes or pay for the health care of others, whatever it might be. It's the antithesis of classical liberalism, the antithesis of freedom. So I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about borders, natural law, and why people have a natural right to protect their culture, because culture is important. It is perhaps the only type of collectivism that is acceptable, and I'm going to explain why. So, many of the libertarian ANCAPs, or just freedom lovers in general, are aware of natural law, originally described by John Locke, described so elegantly by Thomas Paine. And according to natural law, we are endowed by God. And don't focus on the God. If you don't believe in God, then we have a birthright to certain freedoms. These freedoms aren't given to us. They can only be taken away by unjust authority. So, for example, we are born with the ability to speak. I could speak to you right now. No one has to give me this right. It can be artificially and unjustly taken away. The government could come along like they do in the United Kingdom and say, Tom, what you're saying is hate speech. We're going to throw you in a prison cell. That's fine. They could stop me from speaking, but it doesn't take away that the ability to speak, this is a natural right for me. This is something I can do. And if the government comes along and they take it away, well, that was done unjustly. But they could never give you the ability to have free speech. They could only take away what you're born with. And this is true for so many things. And this was the origin of the American Bill of Rights. The ability to freely practice religion. I could practice my religion. You could declare it illegal if you're the government and come take away my natural right to do what I have the ability to do. That's fine. You put me in a cell, but you're doing that unjustly. You're using an unjust monopoly over the use of force to take away the right that God gave me, that I could do without the government having any say in it. This is true for the right to peacefully assemble, to talk politics that the government might not like. Again, the government could come along and they could arrest people who peacefully assemble, but those people have the natural right. That's endowed by God. You're able to do that whether there's a government or not. So the government can only take away that right. It can't give you that right. This is why natural rights need to be understood. For example, when the government says you have a right to health care, no, they're saying that's a privilege. What the government is saying is that the government will use its immoral monopoly over the use of force, and they will go up to a doctor, for example, and say, if you don't provide this service for free, we will take away your license and lock you in a prison cell. So the government is forcing someone else to do something against their will. These are the type of rights that government claims to give you. Really, these are privileges, and they are completely immoral because they involve the use of force. But these natural rights, you are born with them, and they can only be taken away by government. They can't be granted by government. It's why the founders gave us the right to bear arms, because within those natural rights, they said, why do you have a right to a gun? Well, it's not that you have a right to a gun. You have a right to protect yourself, whether that's from a neighbor or whether that's from the government itself. And because of this natural law, it dictates that we don't serve government. Government is only meant to serve the will of the people. So if the government serves the people, well, what kind of service is it if the government has a monopoly over weaponry and the people who it allegedly services are arrested by the government if they themselves have weapons? So this is the basis of natural law. And within natural law, we have a right to property. And the reason for that is, as long as you obtain property through just means, if someone owns a piece of property and you say, I'll give you this amount of money, and you sell me the property, and they say, okay, well, you purchased that property through voluntary measures. Everyone involved volunteered to take part in that transaction. Therefore, under natural law, the obtaining of that property was completely justified. And if someone comes along with a gun and they try to take your property, or the government claims that they're going to confiscate that property, well, they could take it away, but they've violated your natural property right, because you obtained your property through voluntary means, and now it's being taken away unjustly through the use of force. Under natural law, we are born with the rights I described to you: freedom of speech, the right to assemble, the right to freely practice religion, all of these things. The right to protect yourself, which is the right to bear arms. And finally, you have, well, I kind of just described it, you have the right to life. So if someone attempts to kill you, right, the government could make it illegal to defend yourself, but again, they're taking away your natural, you have a right to defend your own life. So if someone tries to kill you, you are completely justified in killing them to protect yourself. Just as if the government attempts to kill its own citizenry, the people have a right to fight back against that government. So simply put, natural rights mean you have the right, the God-given right, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that's what that line means. The pursuit of happiness means the right to obtain property through voluntary means, the right to own your services through voluntary means, right? That doctor, the government can force him to provide you a service, but they're taking away his natural rights to do whatever he wants as long as he's not hurting anyone else. So with that backdrop, we all have these natural rights. And when the government declares creates this welfare state, which is on its own a violation of this natural law, the government comes along and they say, we are going to tax you and redistribute your money to other people for food stamps, for welfare, for public housing, whatever it might be, for Medicaid, Social Security. We're going to come along and redistribute your money. What the government's really saying is that we are going to come along and violate your property rights. We are going to throw you in prison if you don't give us your money. We are all Negan, right? Walking Dead reference. We are going to throw you in prison if you don't hand over your money so that we can redistribute that money to other people and essentially buy their votes. That's what the government is doing. They're using the immoral monopoly over the use of force to violate the property rights that the government is supposed to protect. That's the reason we set up government in the first place, to increase the power and authority of government. So the welfare state on its face is immoral, and it's a violation of natural law. But then the government takes it a step further, and they say, we are going to have open borders, and we are going to use the welfare state to lure people in from the third world who themselves have a very low quality of life. And this will work as a magnet, because these people in South America, for example, well, their governments themselves are very corrupt. Their natural rights are constantly violated, so they have very little money. And now they're being told, if they come to the Americas, if they come to Europe, for example, they will be given by the government more money than they could ever make in their home countries for doing nothing. The government is promising to violate the property rights. The Western governments are promising to violate the property rights of their own citizens, and they're using that to lure people in from the third world. So with that alone, the people in the West have the right to vote against immigration, because on the one hand, yes, you're violating the natural rights of free movement, right? We're able to move freely unless someone artificially stops us. You're voting to violate the natural rights of free movement of people from the third world. But that is justified because it is to protect your property rights. So once your property rights are being violated through the welfare state, you have a natural right to defend yourself and to fight back to protect your property rights. So when the government is using people from the third world to further violate your property rights, you have the right to say, no, under natural law, I have the right to protect myself. Therefore, voting for the protection of borders is justified under natural law. Because you can't talk about having open borders until you first protect your property rights, which means you have to first completely get rid of the welfare state. It's the same concept that if someone was coming over the border with the intention to kill the American population, if these people were coming over the southern border, or if these people were going into Europe and openly stating their intention is to kill everyone in Europe or kill everyone in America, well, it would be understood. Well, you have a natural right to life, a natural right to protect yourself, therefore calling for the borders to be protected is justified. You're protecting your natural rights. Well, it's the same concept with protecting your property rights. You have a natural right to protect your property rights, therefore you calling for closed borders is a protection of those rights, those natural property rights, and therefore that is justified. But it goes a step further. All of these rights that I described, they derive from Judeo-Christian roots. That's where all of these concepts come from. And Western civilization, whether that be Europe, whether that be the United States of America, is built on these Judeo-Christian principles. Classical liberalism, Western principles, Western civilization is built on these principles. So all of these rights, these natural rights, freedom of speech, the right to assemble, the right to freely practice religion, the right to protect yourself, the right to bear arms, the right to a fair trial, so you can't just be thrown in a prison cell. It has to be proven that you have violated the natural rights of someone else before you could be thrown in a prison cell. All of these natural rights are protected by Western culture, by Judeo-Christian roots, by a culture that understands and respects basic liberty and these natural rights. And if we have the right to protect our property, if we have the right to protect our life if it's under threat, if we have the right to protect our natural liberties, whether that be freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, whatever it is, then we have a right to protect the culture that makes all of those things possible, that makes the protection of all those rights possible. And it is classical Western culture that allows us to exercise these natural rights, that allows us to have these freedoms. Therefore, when the government is using the welfare state to invite people in from the third world who don't understand classical Western culture, who don't understand natural law, when the governments of the West are using this welfare state with open borders to incentivize people from the Middle East to come to the West, to incentivize people from Mexico to come to the West who have no understanding and history of these natural laws or respect for Western principles, who might want to implement Sharia law, and then the government is allowing these people to come in and vote away Western principles, to vote against these Western principles, to take away our natural rights, to take away our property rights, so they could vote to take away our freedom of speech, because freedom of speech might be an insult to Muhammad, to take away our right to peacefully protest because the religion of Islam is not just a religion, it is a political ideology. And if you are protesting against it, you are committing blasphemy against Muhammad, because the government is set up in Muhammad's image. When you have people from Mexico coming to America who overwhelmingly vote for bigger government, who overwhelmingly vote for the welfare state, the violation of those property rights, who overwhelmingly vote to take away gun rights, the right to protect ourselves, then they are a threat to the very culture that protects all of the things we hold dear in the first place. And that's why protecting the culture that protects these natural rights is justified, and it is the only acceptable form of collectivism, because it is collectivism justified under natural law. That under natural law you have a right to protect your life, to protect your liberty, and to protect your pursuit of happiness. And those things can only be protected through Western culture, Western principles, and natural law.